Hello everyone and welcome to Philosophication. I'm Jason and today I want to talk about Game of Thrones. This is going to be a rant, so prepare yourself. So I watched Season 8, Episode 3 a few nights ago and I can't stop thinking about how terrible the battle plan was for the defenders of Winterfell. So I'm not a military historian or anything like that. I know next to nothing about medieval military tactics, but I don't think it takes much more than regular old common sense to understand how stupid this plan was. Before we go on, spoilers are ahead. I'm going to talk about this battle in detail, so if you don't want the episode spoiled, go away and come back after you've seen it. You have been warned. First, let's talk about the makeup of the armies. So the side of the living defending Winterfell is made up of three main troop types: the Dothraki cavalry, the Unsullied infantry, and what I'll call the Northern infantry. The Dothraki cavalry are all armed with curved Dothraki swords, known as the idiotic, which are made of regular steel, not Valyrian steel or dragon glass. That's important. We'll come back to it in a minute. The Unsullied are heavy infantry spearmen, something kind of like an ancient Greek hoplite, and they fight in a similar manner to the Greek hoplites. Not exactly in phalanxes, but they definitely fight with spears in tight formation, like the Greek hoplites. The Northern infantry is made up of soldiers from various houses of the north, as well as regular people who have been armed for combat because the defenders are outnumbered and they need every man they can get. They're armed with various melee weapons, and they have a fair number of archers mixed in as well. So both the Unsullied and the Northern infantry have been armed with dragon glass weapons, and a few have Valyrian steel swords. Again, this is important, and we'll come back to it in a second. Also on the side of the living are Daenerys' two remaining dragons and a few catapults. So the side of the dead, the Night King's army, is basically just a horde of ice zombies led by the White Walkers, also known as the Others. And these are just reanimated corpses of dead humans, and also one giant, and the others are supernatural ice beings from the wilds north of the Wall. The Night King also has one of Daenerys' dragons, which was killed last season and resurrected into his army. The numbers on each side aren't exactly clear, but it's fair to assume the defenders of Winterfell are pretty heavily outnumbered, and not only are they outnumbered, but we know that the White Walkers can resurrect dead humans, which means every man the defenders lose can later be resurrected to fight for the Night King, which makes the situation even worse. So with that in mind, here's a rough diagram of how the defending forces are lined up. So here we have the castle of Winterfell. The defenders have dug a trench in front of the castle wall and filled it with flammable things, brush and branches and such, and they plan to ignite it later. So in front of the trench are the infantry, with the Unsullied in the center and the Northern infantry on the flanks. In front of the infantry are the catapults, and in front of the catapults are the Dothraki cavalry. So we don't really see where the army of the dead is, we just know they're out there somewhere in front, coming down from the north. So already, I hope you can see how stupid this setup is. First of all, why are the catapults in front of the infantry? See, these catapults throw their projectiles in high arcing trajectories so they can fire over things a short distance in front of them, like friendly soldiers or trenches, or maybe even, gasp, castle walls. So why the hell would you not have these catapults inside the castle where they have a wall protecting them? Or at the very least, put them behind the trench and the infantry instead of in front. So then they could fire over the heads of the friendly infantry and they'd be protected. So the crews can load and fire without getting harassed by the enemy immediately. But as it is here, once the battle starts, they get off maybe one or two volleys and immediately get overrun, and they're pretty much useless for the rest of the battle. Second of all, why is the army in front of the trench? This trench would be a great obstacle to slow down the horde as they advance, but it's not doing much if your army is in front of it. So apparently the plan is to fight the horde on open ground for a little bit and then retreat inside the castle when the army starts to get overwhelmed, but all the trench is doing back there is acting as an obstacle to your own army as they try to retreat. Third, what the hell are the Dothraki planning on doing? Remember I said it's important that they're armed with regular swords and not dragonglass? Yeah, that's because the undead army is undead and they can't be killed with regular weapons. They have to be killed with either fire, Valyrian steel, or dragonglass, which is obsidian. At this point, everyone knows this, which is why everyone but the Dothraki are armed with either dragonglass or Valyrian steel. The archers are using fire arrows, and the catapults are shooting flaming projectiles. But the Dothraki are just armed with regular non-Valyrian steel swords, which means they're completely useless because they can't kill anything. And actually, they're worse than useless because they'll all just die immediately and get resurrected into the enemy's army. So luckily, the Red Priestess Melisandre shows up out of nowhere right before the battle starts, does some magic, and lights all the Dothraki swords on fire, so they'll actually be able to kill the undead. But remember, this was not part of the plan. None of the leaders in Winterfell knew she was going to show up and do this, so apparently they were just going to send in the Dothraki cavalry to die, and they just got lucky that she just happened to show up out of nowhere. Now, I guess it's possible that maybe they made a bunch of Dothraki swords out of dragonglass, and that's what they were using, but if that's the case, number one, they didn't do a very good job of showing that, so I don't know when they did that. They made a bunch of other weapons out of dragonglass, but I didn't ever see any Dothraki swords getting made. And second, if they were made of dragonglass, there's no reason to light them on fire. So why the hell would you light them on fire? Like they're pretty short swords. They'll probably just burn your hand. Like why do that? If they can already kill the enemy, why do you need to light them on fire? Is it just for dramatic effect, I guess? In any case, I think they were just I'm pretty sure they were just regular swords, which is stupid because they can't kill anything and they just got lucky that Melisandre showed up. But then the fiery swords end up doing absolutely zero good because the first thing that happens is the Dothraki just charge the enemy and all of them die immediately anyway. So keep in mind, it's nighttime. The defenders have no idea exactly how many undead there are, they just know it's a lot. They also don't know exactly where the undead army is because they've done no scouting at all, even though they have 2 freaking dragons that could easily fly over the enemy and do that job. Yeah, it's nighttime. It might be hard to see from the air, but guess what? Dragons happen to have their own light source because they can breathe fire. They should be able to light up the enemy, get a rough idea of where they are at least, and maybe even kill a few while they're at it. But nope, none of this is done. It's dark enough that the main body of the Winterfell army can't even see the undead yet from where they are, but they just send in the Dothraki in a blind frontal cavalry charge where they all die, adding to the ranks of the undead and probably doing more harm than good to the cause unless they killed twice as many undead as the number of Dothraki they had to begin with, which is doubtful at best. So it seems to me like the Dothraki could have been used much more effectively if they had just done what cavalry has so often done throughout military history. Wait until the enemy is engaged with your infantry and then use the cavalry to hit them in the flanks. The undead don't have any cavalry of their own, and they're just a mindless horde with no real tactical sense, so there's no way they're putting up an effective defense to cavalry hitting them in the flanks. They just have to rely on sheer numbers to eventually win a battle of attrition, which is basically what they end up doing anyway. But no, just waste all of your cavalry in the first 30 seconds of the battle with a blind frontal assault where they all die. And remember, if Melisandre hadn't showed up at the last minute to magically light their swords on fire, they wouldn't even have been capable of killing the enemy with the weapons they had. I don't know what to call this other than idiotic. So the Dothraki cavalry charge in and mostly die. A few survivors stagger back to the infantry lines, and the catapults get off a few rounds each. Then the undead horde charges, and carnage ensues. They just charge in a massive wall of bodies and overwhelm the infantry. Well, first they overwhelm the catapults, which, again, are in front of the infantry for some reason, and are completely useless at this point. So then the front lines just disintegrate under the sheer mass of undead bodies coming at them, which was totally predictable, by the way. Jon Snow and a bunch of the other commanders have fought the undead before, and they had to know they were going to attack like this, and yet they put their army in front of a defensive trench and put no obstacles in the path of the horde. So the horde just gets to charge across an open field with absolutely nothing to break their momentum, and they just get to slam into the front lines of the infantry. So as the northern infantry gets overwhelmed and starts to retreat back inside the castle walls, guess what they have to cross? That's right, the defensive trench that's behind them for some reason. Now, when they dug this trench, they put a small, narrow bridge over it right in front of the castle gate to facilitate the retreat, and they plan to knock the bridge down once everyone is safe inside and then light the trench on fire to stop the horde. So as I said before, the trench just becomes an obstacle to their own retreat. No one can really cross the trench itself fast enough, so the entire army is trying to squeeze through this narrow bottleneck that is the bridge, while the Unsullied make a last stand to protect their retreat, and most of them end up dying too. So once all the survivors are inside the walls, Melisandre lights the trench on fire with her fire magic, and the horde stops at the trench for a minute because of the fire, but it doesn't take them long to figure out that they can just start walking into the trench, pile up bodies in there, and eventually there will be enough bodies to smother the fire a little bit so the ones behind can walk across without getting burnt, and they start to trickle through, just a few at a time at first. Now, I have to keep coming back to this trench thing, and the fact that the infantry was in front of the trench to start the battle. Don't you think it would have been great to have this current situation happening at the beginning of the battle before the defenders lost any men, instead of now, after they've already lost all of the Dothraki and all of the Unsullied? You just had to dig the freaking trench in front of the army and set it on fire to begin with. Yes, the horde is still going to get through eventually, but at least their entire mass of bodies won't be slamming into you at a full sprint to start the battle. The trench will hold them up while their dumb zombie brains figure out how to cross, and all this time you could have had the dragons flying over and strafing the horde with their fire breath, and if you put the damn catapults inside the castle instead of out front, they could be doing a lot of damage too. And when they do start to come over the trench, it'll be just a little trickle at first, and you should be able to kill a lot of them before they kill many of you. That seems much more manageable than having a mass of thousands of sprinting undead slam into your front lines. And if you do have to retreat eventually, you don't have a freaking trench in your way. So I think this covers most of the idiocy of the battle plan. Once the undead figure out how to cross the trench, it's only a matter of time before the castle gets overrun. And at that point, everyone is just in a desperate fight for their lives. So at some point, the Night King resurrects all the dead humans into his own army, which makes this already horrible situation even worse. And then he eventually makes it into the castle because he wants to take out Bran Stark. But at the last minute, Arya comes in out of nowhere and stabs the Night King with a Valyrian steel dagger and kills him, which also kills the rest of the horde because that's how the White Walkers and their horde work. You take out the leader, and the rest of them die too. So this completely idiotic battle plan utterly fails in the most predictable possible way. The defending army is completely devastated, and the only thing that saves the survivors from getting completely wiped out to a man is Arya killing the Night King at the last minute, which was kind of cool, I guess. Now you might think that this is all just nitpicky because none of this matters to the story and it was still an emotionally impactful episode, and I'll give you that. The episode was emotionally impactful, but here's the thing. You're also right that none of it matters to the story, and that's the point. There's nothing about this idiotic battle plan that was essential for the story to happen, which is to say that the writers of this episode could just as easily have had the Winterfell leaders come up with a reasonably intelligent, halfway competent plan, still end up losing because of the sheer numbers of undead and the fact that the Night King can resurrect dead Winterfell soldiers, and you could have had the same situation happen at the end with Arya saving the day. So to me, this just seems like lazy writing. Apparently, the writers of this episode assume that their audience has the critical thinking skills of a sea cucumber, and they were okay with having a bunch of supposedly competent military commanders carry out a plan that might as well have been thought up by George Custer's retarded cousin. So in conclusion, Jon Snow is an idiot, Daenerys is an idiot, and any person who had any kind of input into this battle plan is an idiot. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, please. This has been my dissertation. Thank you all for listening. If you like this show, there are many ways you can support it. You can talk about it on your own blog or podcast, you can share it on social media with your friends, or you can leave a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you happen to listen to it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel and hit the thumbs up button if you like this video. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time on Philosophication.